I'd like to ask you, Zach, we will need much more volume. The Jewish people, like much more, much more. So for those that notice, we're about to start, he's working on that. We need more, and more, and more, because, but even with lots of volume and microphones, if you don't cooperate with us, it will be very hard to communicate. Kristallnacht owes its name to the shards of shattered glass that lined Sherman streets in the wake of the pogrom. Broken glass from the windows of synagogues, homes, and Jewish-owned business plundered and destroyed during the violence. The Kristallnacht tomorrow, 69 years ago, it wasn't just about broken glasses, but about the realization of European Jews that what they understood as their society and their home was broken too. Jewish tradition speaks a lot about brokenness. Our story starts with 2 broken tablets. And we don't escape from brokenness. We face brokenness with light. So we will start this evening of study and evening of light by actually lighting candles, bringing light. So I invite you to light a candle. We have many candles, and to fill this room with the light of the candles. And please turn off your phones. If you are invited and welcome to light candles. We are going to light candles while we are listening to music. I get your attention again. I know that some people are still lighting candles. I'd like to ask your attention again. Maybe one of the most important things that we can take away from lighting candles are our voices and the living noise in a positive way that we make. The fact that we are here, that we are present. I'd like to invite you to take one more minute before we start with our presentation and we introduced our guest speaker that we have been honored to have. But Miriam will do that in 2 more minutes. I'd like to invite you to take 2 minutes for a music meditation, to check where you are and to try to be present in this place and this sacred space that we are trying to create here together. The song that we are going to hear is called The Lonely Child, and it is a tribute to all the Jewish children who were forced into hiding by the war.
I never knew my grandparents. My parents were both Holocaust survivors. My sister and I are second-generation children of Holocaust survivors, and my children are third generation. Last spring, my daughter came to me and said, "Mom, I heard this amazing speaker at our Yom HaShoah presentation, and he told us a story, and it's changed my life forever." And at that time, I decided that I wanted to share, even though I was going on my daughter's word, I wanted to share her experience with my extended family, all of you. And so I began a quest. And tonight's presentation with Dr. Bernd Wallschlaeger is supported by donations of our second-generation children of Holocaust survivors. And I thank each and every one of you for supporting that. And so I'm going to turn the microphones over to you, and I trust that you will be ever as inspiring as my daughter says.
Thank you very much.
And if not...
Uh-oh. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. First of all, can you hear me? Yes. All right, so we have the microphones in the right distance. whenever I'm being asked to speak in front of an audience, probably of very nice people, most of them that I don't know, I asked myself, am I out of my mind to share a personal story, and for what reason, if I'm sharing it, for what reason do I do that? And it took me a long time to talk, a very long time, because I could not reconcile these extreme opposites in my life that shaped not only me, but the life of my children. And one day my son, Tal, he is now 29 years old, I think he was about 15, he asked me a simple question. He asked me in Hebrew, Abba mi asaba sheli, Father, who is my grandfather. And at that moment, I knew that I have to tell him something, but how? It's a simple question and a simple answer, and probably in your case, you can answer that without getting too embarrassed. But in my case, I didn't know where to start. Because on the one hand, his father, yours truly, is Jewish and Israeli and served as a physician in a combat unit in the Israel Defense Forces. And on the other hand, my father, his grandfather, was a highly decorated World War II German tank commander in an elite unit and a convinced National Socialist. So how do you reconcile these two worlds? And what I attempted with my son is what I'm going to attempt with you, to explain not only what happened, but what are the conclusions that I drew and I draw from my life. And it's not over yet, but what did I learn? And the reason that I'm speaking now is because I want to share my experience and hopefully lit a candle in your heart that will burn forever and will never forget what happened. So how did my life start? Well, everybody's life starts with the time and the place you were born at and born in. I was born in May the 9th, 1958, in a beautiful city in Germany called Bamberg. I know that some people of you were there, others maybe not. But this, even though I'm not a spokesperson for the German tourism industry, but it is a city that is gorgeous. 1,000-year-old city, with a long history of famous princes, queens, rulers in Germany. Actually, the only pope buried outside Rome was buried in Bamberg. So in this sense of history, I was born into and learned from my teachers. I remember I was 6 years old when I started elementary school. We had every year stories about who it was who, where to go where, who built this church, this building. So literally, we were little historians. But one thing I noticed, not intellectually though, but I noticed that there's an aspect missing. Something is taboo. I knew, for example, that the war took place. That was obvious. As children we knew because there were foreign soldiers stationed in our town, Americans, 15,000 American soldiers with family members. And I knew that if there are foreign soldiers in town, that means we didn't win that war. That I figured somehow out. But nobody talked about it. I knew that the war shaped our family because whenever I asked at home about my grandparents, I was told they're gone because of the war. So something big happened. Nobody wants to talk about it. Why? That was the feeling that I had. And we later on learned, of course, about the course, why nobody talked about it. And I drilled my parents over and over because I was a very curious child, asking them to explain to me our own family history. So slowly but surely, my father and my mother told me their respective stories, and they had very different stories to offer me. On the one hand, my father, the glory of battle, and on the one hand, my mother, the horror of being a refugee. My father told me on long walks that we had on Sunday afternoons in the forest. He was a hunter, an outdoor person. He taught me how to fish, how to shoot, how to handle a rifle. And he told me over and over again, once he started talking, about his experience in the Second World War. That he was the youngest German tank commander in an elite unit under the command of General Guderian, the father of the German Blitzkrieg. And this elite unit broke through every frontier and border that Germany crossed. September the 1st, 1939, the attack on Poland. Following year, the attack on France, Belgium, and Holland. Then in the year 1941, in the summer of 1941 or late summer of 1941, the attack on the former Soviet Union, Operation Barbarossa. My father's tanks, the first in, and my father reached the furthest point into the war, into the east, by conquering a town called Orel with the intent to push into Moscow, which never happened. And for his accomplishment to conquer this strategically located town, he was awarded the Knight's Cross by a man whom he adoringly referred to as his Führer, Adolf Hitler. Now, for me, my father was a hero. 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, my father was a hero. And this message that my father was a hero was reinforced by his old war buddies who came to visit our house once a year, among them senior generals, and they celebrated the good old time, i.e. the war, and emphasizing that my father, Arturo, was a hero and I should be proud of him. So I was mighty proud of my father, the knight in shining armor. On the other hand, my mother told me a completely different story. She was an ethnic German born in Czechoslovakia, in Sudetenland, a Sudeten German. And these were Germans for many generations, lived in Czechoslovakia on the border to Germany. And she was born in Karlsbad in a wealthy merchant family and lived a beautiful life as the only child in a beautiful villa, everything to her disposal. And as a result of the war, they had to flee away from the advancing Russian troops and fled penniless to the western part of Germany and lived their lives, a miserable life in the beginning as refugees. Many thousands were killed during this time. So glory and horror, I needed to reconcile that. But I knew that that was a horrible story that my parents experienced and expressing, but I still couldn't much do out of it. Then there was something funny in our house that we were living in that I didn't understand either. We lived in this 2-story massive building in neoclassical style, building in about the 18th century. In this massive building, we had an apartment in the downstairs area. There were 2 families living there, and the landlady lived upstairs and taking this entire second floor by herself, living there with her maids. And my mother referred to her as the Countess, die Gräfin, and I should not talk to her unless spoken to. And in the hallway, right next to the wooden stairway leading upstairs to the Countess' apartment, was a larger-than-life portrait of a man mounted at the wall, depicting an officer in uniform, like pictures that I see of my father in uniform at home. But a painting, this uniformed officer with the officer's insignia on the shoulder, the Knight's Cross around his neck, the officer's cap, but different facial features, so it obviously was not my father. And when I asked my father about this man, I asked him only once, my father referred to him as the traitor, der Verräter. Now I was a little bit confused. How can a man who looked like my father be a traitor, a bad person? And how can my father who looked like him be the good person? What happened? Until I learned from the lady upstairs, she had grandchildren, and I sneaked, whenever the grandchildren were there, I sneaked upstairs and playing with them, I knew them. And I saw many pictures of this man, and I asked her who this man was, and she told me that it's her late husband, Count Klaus von Stauffenberg, the German colonel who was leading the assassination attempt on Adolf Hitler on the 20th of July 1944, which failed. He was executed the same night. His wife, Nina von Stauffenberg, who lived upstairs, his widow, was thrown into a concentration camp, Ravensbrück, survived, and her children, given up to adoption, were reunited with her in 1955. So obviously something happened that my father and my mother would not talk about. And in school we started to talk about it. I was about 10, 11, maybe 12 years old, about that war and about that time, what happened. And we heard a sanitized story that is probably I can recall in the following way. The Nazis came to power in 1933, democratically elected in the beginning and done taking over. A dictatorship prevailed. Many people disappeared in so-called concentration camps. The Nazis triggered the Second World War. In the Second World War, between 50 to 60 million people perished. Among them, 6 million Jews as collateral damage of war. And on the 8th of May 1945, the Nazis had to leave, like the gang of Huns that invaded Germany and then disappeared. That was the story. Nothing about the Holocaust yet. And then came an event in 1972 that changed everything, at least for me. The Olympics, the Olympiade in Germany in Munich, 1972. And that was an event that we all prepared, we were all prepared, and were our teachers trying to prepare us to recognize that this is a new Germany, a democratic Germany, part of the Western Alliance, part of the economic Western alliance, not the communist Germany on the other side of the border, a Western democratic Germany, and we should be proud to live in this country. And it was painted out pointed out, and literally a painting was given in, I remember there was a painting in our school depicting the opening of the Olympics in 1936 when Adolf Hitler brutally, 1938, brutally changed the shape of Germany by using this Olympics to push through his ideological agenda. So this was a different Germany. And it actually was not only a different Germany on paper, it was a different Germany respectfully regarding the leadership. This was a leadership of politicians who were born, some of them after the war, or those who were grown up during the war and changed their minds slowly. But most importantly, this was in 1969 a tremendous change in leadership in the election where Willy Brandt, a social democrat, rose to power. And Willy Brandt was the first post-war German politician who was not tainted by the past. Actually, the opposite. He was thrown out of Germany, actually fled Germany in 1933 because he was a socialist. Fled to Norway, and after the occupation of Norway to Sweden, and then from Sweden back to Germany in 1945 to rebuild the Social Democratic Party. And when he rose to power in 1969, he made it a point to the world and to us as Germans that this is a different Germany, but we have to work very hard to improve and face our facts and face the history. In December 1970, I remember he traveled to Poland, and in front of the Warsaw Ghetto Memorial, he sank on his knees, bowed his head, and remained kneeling for many minutes, asking for forgiveness what Germany did. And I remember it well, this cold December day 1970, because my father, who in the morning always read the newspaper with me, slammed in this morning the newspaper on the breakfast table, yelling and screaming, "Schon wieder ein Verräter," again a traitor. And I was confused. I was raised Catholic by a very Orthodox Catholic mother. And she wanted me to become a priest. Now, obviously, that didn't work out, sort of. And so I was literally soaked with the Catholic belief, was an altar boy, and kneeling in front of a memorial was something positive for me. Why is my father so mad? And the same chancellor with this tremendous moral standing in the Western world, Willy Brandt, our chancellor, opened the Olympics in the summer on a hot August day in 1972 to a great fanfare. And I remember it because we had our first TV at home, black and white though, and my parents invited friends over, was fine food, wine, a festive environment. Everybody watched the opening of the Olympics, and all the teams parade into the stadium carrying their respective flags, and suddenly a team appeared on the screen carrying a flag with a star inside. And in that moment, everybody felt silent in the room. Kind of if a ghost appeared. And I knew that is the do not ask the question moment. And I asked myself, that's funny, this is another team carrying a different flag. I had no idea what that meant. Why my parents and their friends are so silent? And then, 10 days later, the catastrophe happened. The same team that so proudly appeared and marched into the stadium was brutally attacked by a group of Palestinian terrorists. We know now that they were guided by the East German, the Communist Germany Security Service, Stasi, were provided with weapons and logistical information. They climbed the fence in the Olympic Village where all the athletes lived, attacked the Israelis in their apartments. 2 were murdered, brutally murdered, and the others were taken hostage, and the Olympics came to an halt. The German government, so embarrassed that Jews were murdered and kept hostage on German soil, dispatched the highest ranking politician to the Olympic Village to negotiate face-to-face with the terrorist leader, among them the Minister of Interior, who offered himself and other Germans as hostages. The terrorist leader refused. He demanded that the hostages will be flown out together with them to a military airplane provided by the German army to an Arab country of their choice, and that Israel should exchange 283, well, we call them terrorists, Arab prisoners, in lieu of the 10 Israelis who survived. A deal was struck, and the same night 2 helicopters took off from the Olympic Village, one with the hostages of one part of the apartment, the other with the hostages and terrorists of the other part. And they landed on the military airport nearby Munich called Fürstenfeldbruck, all played out on live TV. And after the moment after they landed, and of course nobody could see what happened, the horror and the catastrophe happened. Firefight, explosions, firefight lasted for 1 hour plus. Explosion shattered the whole area. Light of the shining on the explosion, it was seen for miles away from in the airport area, and then deafening silence. Nobody knew what happened until an American journalist broke the news. They're all gone. What happened is that the German police tried to liberate the Israeli hostages and to kill the Palestinian terrorists. The Mossad unit on the ground begged them not to instigate an attack because they knew that the Palestinians are battle-hardened and would survive and would actually kill the Israelis on the spot, and that's what happened. In the moment the first bullets were shot by the German police, the Palestinians immediately, the terrorist leader, immediately threw a one-hand grenade into the helicopter on his left, which exploded and all Israelis perished. The other helicopter they sprayed with machine gun fires and everybody died. The next day, in the newspaper, that picture that literally shaped my life and reshaped my life. 2 helicopters on the tarmac, one burned out with the charred remains of the Israelis inside, the other helicopter with the bodies of the Israelis slumped over the seats, covered with blood-stained linen, and a huge headline, Jews killed in Germany again, in German, of course. And I speak fluent German. At that time, I already spoke fluent German, but I didn't understand the part with the again. So I asked my father, I said, what does it mean? And we had a very close relationship. He was an intellectual, a very intelligent man who actually reviewed politics with me at home using a newspaper. But this morning he was upset. He said, look, what they do to us again, they the Jews, look how they stain Germany's image. The victims as perpetrators and the perpetrators as victims. That was his MO. And in school, following this event, a few weeks later, our teachers started to talk about everything. They established a curriculum, Holocaust curriculum, and used the term Holocaust for the first time. Never heard about it before. The murder of 6 million, not as an accident of history, but as a deliberate attempt to extinguish, to murder as many Jews as possible in the name of Germany. And I was shocked. I never heard about Auschwitz, Birkenau, Treblinka, Eichmann, Mengele. And some of our teachers cried. And I asked myself, what happened? Does my father know about that? Doesn't he want to talk about it because he saw it? Or maybe even he did that. So I came home, I remember one night, and my father came back from his job. He worked in a Ministry of Civil Defense in Germany, in Bonn, north of Bamberg, and once a month he came back. And so I asked him, Father, in the school we learn about the Holocaust. What did you know about it? He responded, Bernd, first of all, your teachers are all communists. This is a lie. It never happened. This is communist propaganda. So I was caught between the rock and a hard place. On the one hand, my father, whom I respected and feared, told me it's a lie. On the other hand, my teachers, whom I respected and admired, told me a different story. Who is right and who is wrong? Is there a lie in between? So I started to read as much as I could, going in libraries, bookstores, and there was quite a lot of literature already published abroad, in English, in French, in German. And the more I read, the more I had this sinking feeling that maybe my father would not talk about that time because he did something. So I decided to ask my father. There was only one problem: my father wouldn't talk about that. And I knew there was an opportunity that I could use, actually his disease that I could use, because he was a raging alcoholic. And as a child, I learned my father has three phases, went through 3 phases in the night, every evening. Either phase 1, he was looking for a drink, he was restless, irritable, and discontent, don't talk to him. Phase 3, he was drunk in La La Land, can't talk to him at all. And then the phase 2 in between was the twilight zone, I call it the Schicker zone nowadays. And in that moment, he was more susceptible to manipulation, get money out of him, talk to him, and I asked him. And his questions, my questions that I posed, formed answers that one can categorize into 3 types. Phase 1, when I asked him for the first time, he said, look, Bernd, first of all, as Wehrmacht, the military, we didn't do anything. Whatever allegedly happened, we didn't do it. It was all the SS. Now, that was a blatant lie. I already know that from the lady upstairs. Ranking officers in the German army, specifically in the East, had full knowledge what happened behind and before enemy lines. They knew exactly what happened. They had to happen. They had to know it because my father, 25 years after his death, I was provided by a historian and researcher a photograph of my father sitting in the summer of 1942 in the East in a conference together with Heinrich Himmler. Very animated discussion. And when a Wehrmacht officer, highly ranked like my father, was a major at that time, communicates with Heinrich Himmler, the head of the snake, the SS, it was not about military strategy. That was not the SS's task, but about securing areas where mass murder took place. Then, the same about 2 years ago, when I was in Germany for the first time to a tour of my hometown, talking to a mostly non-Jewish audience about my life, another historian provided me with a suitcase. He said, Dr. Wollschlaeger, I have something for you. I said, what is that? He said, this is a suitcase and please open it in a hotel and you will understand. I said, where do you get that from? I knew it was not a bomb. He said, look, your father's late mechanic, when he returned to Germany before his death, he told his daughters to give that to the son of the commander. That was me. And I got the suitcase and I opened it in his presence. And inside were ripped pieces of Torah scrolls and pieces that were cut in a certain fashion. And I asked the historian, said, what does it mean? He said, well, when your father's tanks ripped into German villages, in Polish Jewish villages, they killed everybody. And then they slaughtered everybody. They tore out of the synagogue whatever out that they could sell, and among them the Torah scrolls. He soaked the Torah scrolls in water, cut them in shapes, and used it as an insulation material for the German tanks in the cold Russian winter. So my father did it, and he knew it, so he was a liar and a murderer. I already had that sense then. Let's go back to phase 2 when I asked him what happened. He said, look, Bernd, first of all, when civilians were killed, it always had to do that they were partisans. They're partisans that doesn't fall under the Geneva Convention, so we could kill them. There's always an explanation, a legal explanation for him and for all those murders. And I asked my father, I already doubted him very much, I said, look, explain me one thing. 1 million plus children were murdered. Babies were torn alive out of the mother's arms and thrown into burning pits. Children were hoarded into the concentration camps, specifically Birkenau, Auschwitz and Treblinka, and were killed. Their bodies burned to ashes and the ashes scattered on the killing fields of Auschwitz. I was there personally to see the remnants. So you tell me that the children fought you? What kind of nonsense is that? And finally he relented and he knew he couldn't explain me anymore these half-hearted explanations that he gave me. So he told me, look, Bernd, what you call the Holocaust was a blessing for the world because somebody had to clean up the mess in the East. Somebody had to clean up the dreck, the schmutz, dirt. And the world should be grateful that we did it as Germans, and now they blame us for that. I don't understand. And that was the last stick that broke the camel's back of trust that I had with my father. I turned away from him. He was not the hero anymore. He was a criminal in my eyes. And I asked myself for the first time, why the Jews? I never met a Jew. The only thing I heard about Jews was in religion classes after Sunday ceremony in the Catholic Church, when the priest almost every time told us the Jews killed Jesus. I knew the Jews are bad because they killed Jesus. That's the only thing what I heard about Jews. But here I wanted to ask myself, what happened? So I approached my teacher, a trusted teacher, a former Jesuit priest, and asked him, how can I deal with that? What can I do? Because I feel very guilty. And he looked at me and said, Bernd, you don't have to feel personally guilty. But if you wanted to make any kind of amends, you need to make the amends to those who were harmed, i.e. the Jews. I responded, well, I don't know Jews, and said, well, we can arrange that. The Catholic Church once a year invites Jews and Arabs from Israel to a conference, a peace conference to Germany, and members of the German community can participate, and this time we have 2 slots left. So you want to participate, this is the address, I sponsor you so you don't have to pay. And I went to that place. It was a seminar center in the River Rhine Valley, beautiful area. And for the first time I met Jews. When I was 18, they were 17. When you meet people of other cultures, Jews and Arabs alike, I mean, the last thing you want to talk about is what divides you, Holocaust, the terror. You talk with them about to build bridges, what makes you alike. And I must say, I like the Israeli girls a heck of a lot. So I can remove that halo away, but there were some other interests that I pursued that were not necessarily spiritual. It's a PG-rated event. So one of the girls that I liked a lot, and she liked me, she said, look, Bernd, tacheles, if you want to see me again, I go back to Israel in a few days, you have to come and visit me. I want you to meet my parents. I said, absolutely no problem. I was a big Schwitzer. I said, no problem. There was a problem. I had no passport and no money, which I arranged within the following 3 months, and I traveled in an adventurous way. I traveled by train to Munich. From Munich, I crossed with a train. I hitchhiked to Munich, and then from Munich, I took a train to Ancona, a port city in the Adriatic Sea in Italy, and from there, a ferry stopping in Piraeus, where I sent a telex that I would arrive, and then shipped from there via Cyprus to Haifa. It's not a cruise, so don't do it. And she awaited me at the harbor with open arms, and I was elated seeing her. But on the other hand, I asked myself, what happens if the Jews, will recognize that my name, maybe somebody knows my name, maybe my name is on the blacklist, I have no idea. So I was caught in between two opposing feelings. She took me immediately to her parents, took a sharut. At that time, there were community taxis. We drove to the Neve Sha'anan neighborhood in Haifa, a working class neighborhood, and her parents were waiting outside in this small house, small apartment. They moved me in. Her father took my suitcase. Actually, it was a backpack. And he showed me here and spoke in Yiddish, here you will stay, and this is your home. Her mother set up the table with everything that they could afford, falafel, trina, hummus, and they chit-chatted in Yiddish, and I had no idea what they were saying. Her father wanted to communicate with me, but obviously he didn't want to use the language that I spoke. Finally, he broke the ice, and he looked at me and said, in German, if you want to speak German, I can speak German too. And I asked him, how did you learn that? He rolled up the sleeve of his forearm, pointed to the number tattooed, and said, matter-of-factly, ich war in den Lagern, I was in the camps, plural. I survived Auschwitz and was liberated in January 1945 by the Russians. And I took the long march towards the west to seek any place of shelter and lived in a displaced person camp for 3 years. And I noticed that not all Germans were monsters, so I don't hate Germans, but I want to understand one thing. Do you understand what happened? Do they inform you? And I answered him, not in the way that it suffices you. He said, well, then come with me. In 2 days, I have a free day for you. I don't have to work, and I take you to Jerusalem. And that's what he did. We drove by bus to Jerusalem and arrived in Yad Vashem, in the Holocaust Memorial. And there he guided me, a Holocaust survivor who lost everybody. He was the only survivor of his enlarged family. And he took me to the tour through the exhibits, and emotionally, it overwhelmed me. I cried. And he said, look, this should never happen again. And you need to make sure when you come back to Germany to learn as much as you can and tell others. And I asked myself, how can these people who suffered so much can relate to me as a German in normal ways? And not only that, they invited me and they shared their household with me. How can they rebuild their personal lives, their professional lives, and an old country anew? They must be different. They must be strong. There's something going on I want to understand. On my way back to Germany, I decided that I will approach a Jewish community to learn. Now, that was a big, tall order because there were hardly any Jews left. 70 million Germans in West Germany, 28,000 Jews scattered in the cities like Berlin, Frankfurt, Munich. And there was no way to get into that because due to the terror attacks from right-wing and left-wing terror in Germany and Italy and throughout Europe, the communities were hermetically sealed off. There were armored personnel carrier, police with machine guns. You couldn't get in. But there was this small community in my hometown, about 30 Holocaust survivors, Polish Jews, who after they dissolved the displaced person camp in 1954, 1956, stayed in Germany because they got licenses from the American military to be attorneys, real estate agents, and had a very good life. And this community I approached in my hometown. And I remember the first day I approached this community. I knocked at the door, There was only a Magen David on top of the door that indicated that this is a Jewish community. And an old man opened the door, very suspicious when he looked at me. He said, "Was willst du?" And I said, "Well, I want to learn." And I must have said something that opened the door literally. And I said, "Come in." And he led me through this dark corridor. And I remember it was one light in the corner, a red light. And the walls were covered with black granite plates. And each granite plate, dozens of names were written, hundreds on the one wall, a couple of hundreds on the other wall. And I asked him, "What does it mean?" He said, "Do you know that all the Jews in Bamberg disappeared? That's just the list from Theresienstadt, 900 names." He led me to his office, sat me down. The windows were closed, the curtains were closed. It was a summer day, no air condition. And I started sweating, and he took off his jacket. He had a very pale skin, a short-sleeved white shirt, and the numbers tattooed very prominently here, the number tattooed. And I stared on the number, and he said, "First of all, this is Auschwitz. My name is Itzhak Rosenberg. What do you want?" And I told him my story. He said, "That's a very sad story, young man. Get a book, read about it, bring it back. I trust you." I said, "I'm not here just to read books. I read many books. I want to know if I can help you." "But how do you mean by helping?" "Not just that I can do something for you." I said, "Well, there is one thing you can do. For everything, you have to make a geschäft. There's no free lunch. There's no free learning. I will teach you as much as I can. But you have to be my Shabbos goy." Now, Shabbos goy, Shabbos shmoy, I didn't know what that means. For those who are not Jewish in the audience, is of course the Orthodox community. A non-Jew has to do the chores that a Jew cannot do from Friday night to Saturday night, like turn on the light, preparing the food, doing physical labor by moving the chairs around. So I became the Shabbos goy and said, "When should I start?" "Yeah, tomorrow, next Friday." And it was a few days off. "Meet me at 6 o'clock. I was there 6 o'clock. Itzhak was not. He came at 7:30. He said, what are you doing here?" I said, "You told me at 6 o'clock. First of all, I never say at 6 o'clock. And when I say 6 o'clock, it's 7:30. You learn that. You're too German. We have to change that." And that was a stick in my mind. He had a very wicked humor, Itzhak. And so he told me, "Look, this is what we have to do, and this is what you're doing. And when the members of the community come in, do not talk to them. They don't like that an intruder in this tiny little world of Yiddishkeit that they have, that a non-Jew will hang out. So get in the corner after you finish your chores, make yourself invisible, literally, and then ignore them. They will, and they call me the goy. My name was the goy, no person. I was the goy, or goy. And so every Friday, Saturday, every week, month by month, year by year, holiday by holiday, I grew into this Jewish community from a stranger to a friend. And as a friend, they treated me better. And I absorbed the liturgy, the language, the mannerism. And the closer I came to this community of choice, the more I removed myself from my community of origin, i.e. my family. And it came to very tense interactions. I think the top of the interaction, the conflict that I had with my father, was Christmas. And Christmas for a Catholic household was a big deal. My mother insisted to do it according to Orthodox schedule. I remember it literally like a movie playing in my mind. We had to go to Mass. Then came the dinner, symbolic food, lentil soup and carp. Then we had to wait for the bell to ring because my mother opened the door to the living room, big Christmas tree, real candle, and my father standing next to the tree in his finest dark suit with the Knight's Cross around his neck, singing festive Christmas hymns. And I was not there. Now, next day I came home, all hell broke loose. And my father demanded to know, my mother was crying, why you were not there. I said, let me stop this Greek tragedy. You know why I was not there? Because every Friday and Saturday I go to the Jewish community to make good and as much as I can for what you did. I said, you went to the Juden, the Jews? I said, and I tell you something else. I will not sit at the same table pretending the birth of Christ and celebrate it when you have this bloodstained medal on your neck and having blood on your hand. You're a murderer. He looked at me and said, raus, get out. So I was out. I had the second to last year in medical school. I was under financial pressure, even though I had a scholarship. And Itzhak must have noticed that, and nobody gave me money in the community. He must have noticed that something is going on and must have told the members. because suddenly one member approached me who never talked to me. His name was Aaron. And Aaron, I just knew his first name, and he looked at me and said, "Du bist der Goy." After 5 years, yeah, that's very good to know that. Thank you. And your name is Bernd. I said, "Yes, I am. My name is Bernd." Hör mal zu, listen. Deine Jacke, deine Schuhe sind schmutzig. Your jacket and your shoes are dirty. Kauf dir neue Sachen, buy new stuff, and gave me 100 mark. So he insulted me. They were not dirty. And he gave me 100 mark. And I said, "What the hell do I do now?" So I walked to Itzhak, my friend, said, "Itzhak, Aaron insulted me, told me this and this, then he gave me 100 mark to buy new stuff, clothing." He did that? So did you ask him at least for 200? I said, "No." I said, "Because you're Goy." I said, "I don't know what you mean." I said, "Come, sit down. You have to understand after 5 years that obviously you don't yet understand after 5 years being with us, that each of us has underwent a very traumatic experience. Some of us never snapped out of it. And our emotional reactions are very different. And Aaron is somebody who doesn't talk to us either. We have a suspicion that he was one of those who survived the Sonderkommando. I don't know if you know what a Sonderkommando was. For those who don't, it was a group of Jews in Auschwitz that were designated for 90 days to operate the ovens, open the gas chambers, taking the victims out, taking all the valuables away, taking the gold teeth out, anything valuable in that they could find, and then burning the bodies, crushing the bones, and throwing them into empty pits. After 90 days, this group was rotated out and killed, and then came the next group. He survived. And he told me the stories about what he did that I just still give me nightmares. But we formed literally almost father-son relationship. He died 8 months or 9 months later. And Itzhak called me when I was in university, told me the sad news that Aaron died, and said, "You have to come and help us." So I went to Bamberg, took a train, and arrived in the community and asked Itzhak, "What do you want me to do?" Said, "We need a strong man for the Cheva Kadisha, the burial community society. And somebody has to say Kaddish, and you're the only one who knew him." I said, "I can't do that. I'm not a Jew. You're one of us, and you do it." And that's what I did. I helped him to wash the body and covered him in the shroud. We couldn't bury him in the white linen in Germany. Everything had to be done in a casket, so I buried him in a simple casket. And I said Kaddish at the graveside, and afterwards I knew that something had to happen. I mean, I crossed my line way before. I'm living in a different world now. And I told Itzhak, "I want to become a Jew." Itzhak looked at me, said, "This is what we all have. Do you want to have that? Suffering? You don't have to identify yourself with that. Be a ger tzedek, a righteous person. We all love you, but don't be a Jew." I said, "I want to be one." Well, I feared that would happen. I send you to a rabbi in Frankfurt who will talk you out of it. You will not come back before you talk to him. I pay everything, hotel, train, everything, but just come back and make sure that you don't have these ideas in your head anymore. Well, I met the rabbi. We spent 2 days together. He said, "Look, you're a qualified young man. You can study not only medicine, but the Torah and the Talmud. But I don't convert you, because there's no reason for a young German to convert unless there's a pressing reason like marriage, but you're alone, single." And I, of course, told him that I want to convert. And he said, "Well, I will refer your case to the rabbinical court, but the rabbinical court will decide. So whenever you feel that you're ready, I will refer you to the rabbinical court, but I will not participate in your conversion." So he taught me, and in return, I learned a lot. And every time I met him, I asked him about the conversion. He rephrased the same thing about the rabbinical court, and finally he had it. In the spring of 1986, I said, "Look, Bernd, let's stop this. I refer you to the rabbinical court of the next meeting in November 1986. And until you get there, and there's no guarantee that you will pass, you have to do 2 minor details in the physique. The first one involves a little operation. That's a PG-rated event. It didn't involve the nose. Had to be done in an Orthodox facility in Basel, Switzerland, because I underwent an Orthodox conversion. And then a few months later, I needed to immerse in a kosher mikveh, that was done in Metz, in France. And in November 86, I presented myself to the rabbinical court, and it was the most difficult part of my life. This was not a knowledge test and a multiple choice test. This was a test of integrity, of character. And I passed. And the chief rabbi who came back together with other rabbis to read the verdict, as he told it, it was the Teudat Geu, the conversion certificate. He'd read first in Hebrew, then in German, and he asked me, do you understand what that means? Are you willing to sign? I said, yes. So I signed both documents, and he asked me, do you have a Jewish name? Because one name you cannot change. It's called, your last name will be Ben Avraham, but your first name you can change and choose. What is your first name? I said, Bernd. Do you know what that means in German? No. It means the bear slayer. So I make you Dubi, Dov. Take it, it's free. I became Dov Ben Abraham, and he asked me the last question. He said, what do you want to do? I said, I will emigrate to Israel. I said, this is a very, very difficult decision. Did you think about it? Yes. And I applied to the Jewish agency, the Israeli embassy. Within 30 days, I was recognized according to the law of return. My passport was stamped an immigrant visa. And on January the 7th, 1987, I took a one-way flight from Frankfurt to Tel Aviv, never to come back. The night before, I tried to say goodbye to my parents. My mother cried. She knew what happened, that I lied to her that I would come back. My father yelled and screamed in a drunken stupor from upstairs his study, and I should get the hell out of the house. And so I came to Israel that night, was assigned to a kibbutz, working and during the day in the banana fields. If anybody has questions about bananas, please ask me. And then learned Hebrew. 6 months later, I was assigned to a hospital in downtown Miami, downtown Tel Aviv, and to get my German license up to Israeli par. The month later, after I finished this program, I was drafted into Israeli military and underwent basic training, officers' course, and then assignment to a unit. And then, and there, it hit me. I remember, as if it was yesterday, I was assigned, there was the first or second month of the Intifada, the first Intifada, and the Arab uprising, specifically in Ramallah. And I was assigned to a base right next Beit El, right next to Ramallah and the Jewish settlement of Beit El. And we were there to protect the settlers. Not something that we wanted to do, but we were there. And I was introduced to the unit as a Rofei Gdudi, the physician of the unit, and together with my commanding officer, and I was a lieutenant, and my commanding officer was, I think, captain. And he said, look, young guys, this is your doctor. He will take care of you. And I looked at them and said, I'm in big trouble. If they find out that I'm a son of a Nazi, they will run me over or throw me into the Arab village for fun. I cannot talk to anybody about it. I was scared. So literally, I threw my identity in this virtual closet, slammed the door shut, turned the key in the lock, and escaped from the truth. Nobody knew who I was. Well, I was from Germany. I was Jewish, all correct. I had a funny name called Bernd. And I'm a doctor. And some of my soldiers asked me, are you crazy? You coming, making aliyah and coming in this mess and want to help us? You either are a real Zionist and a Meshugana, or you're just Meshugana, because no normal person will do that. But in admiration, I mean, they like me. And so I didn't talk about it until this night where my son Tal, we were living in Miami at that time, asked me a simple question. Dad, who is my grandfather? And I decided to answer him. And he just responds, he said, he went to all my children had Jewish education from kindergarten to middle school, high school, and all 9 yards. And there was Orthodox school, it was conservative school, tefillin in the morning and wearing a kippah all day. And he said, I need to tell my friends. I said, don't tell your friends, please, between us, yeah? Well, that was a problem because 3 months later, or 3 weeks, 3 weeks later, there was a family history day taking place in school, and everybody brought his genealogy evidence and dating back to the house of David. And my son, I was not there, but I was told, raised his hand and proudly declared, and my grandfather was a famous Nazi. I think, needless to say, that was a little problem. And the principal called me in the office, together with the rabbi, and I thought, this is not good. And I asked him, what did my son do? I said, Dr. Wallschlaeger, first of all, you're a respected member of our community. but your son Tal told us a Michigane Geschichte, verdrehte Geschichte, the ganze Michigane, that you are a son of a Nazi. What is wrong with Tal? And I knew it was not about my son. I said, look, Rabbi and principal, I told him the truth, and I told him what happened. And the rabbi looked at me. Do you ever talk about it? No. You should. And I will make you talk today. Come with me to the class. It's very important for you and for us. And when I talked for the first time about it, something happened. The weight was lifted off my shoulder. I didn't feel ashamed. And I asked myself, what can I do now? Because I needed to close the circle of life which I opened so many years ago. And I decided, together with my son, to visit my parents 20 years later. Now, the only place I could visit them was the cemetery. They were all gone. They were long gone. I was not invited to the funerals. Actually, my father had his last will specifically written that Bernd is ein Verräter, Bernd is a traitor. He should never attend my funeral, and he's forbidden to stay close to my graveside. He is a traitor. Well, I found my parents' grave in an area of the Bamberg cemetery, which when you go there and ask for the Wallschlaeger's grave, you will see it the same way like I saw it. My parents' grave is located one row parallel to the wall that separates the Jewish from the Christian cemetery. When you look over to the other side, the wall was not too high. You see at least the third high, the upper top of the Jewish gravestones, large Jewish gravestones, hundreds of years old, some of them, casting their shadow on certain times of the day to the other side. So it was a cold December day, and I didn't know what to tell my son. I said, look, Tal, this is your grandparents' grave. This is my parents' grave. And the irony is they still reside in the shadow of history because they never stepped out of the shadow. I cannot undo the past, but what I can do as a first-generation son of a Nazi, that I can look back, understanding that I cannot undo what happened, but learn my lessons and step out of the shadow and make everything happen that it never happens again, or at least be part, what I did, of the Israel Defense Forces, that in case somebody will attempt it, we will fight back. And that is what I learned and that my son absorbed. But most importantly, I learned something that my father probably not intentionally taught me. That hatred is not this magic dark matter of the universe that just we succumb to and suddenly it's there and we cannot do anything about it. It just happens. No. Hatred is something that we generate every single day by words, callous words of stereotyping, hatred, racism, misogyny, anything that you want to choose in negative wording, we use words. And if these words left unchallenged, they will fall on the fertile ground, and the fertile ground is the mind of others. And there they sprout into deeds. If these deeds left unchallenged, they form habits. If these habits prevail, they form characters. If these characters prevail, they shape social norms that explains but never excuses that an entire people, in that time the Germans, thought it was normal to kill Jews. Specifically on a day-to-day, commemorating the so-called Kristallnacht, which is a euphemism, it was a pogrom night. That so many businesses were trashed, people were killed, concentration camps were filled with Jewish victims, synagogues were burned down. I asked myself, how on earth did the Germans not see what happened? They saw what happened. In my own hometown, 75,000 people lived about, in that time, 1938. The synagogue was in the center of the city like a cathedral. It couldn't be burned down. It had to be torn down. The fire department came and placed explosives to destroy this building. Everybody heard it. You must have been deaf and blind. An entire street was depopulated in downtown, all with Jewish owners. Their suitcases thrown out. They were herded into a temporary holding area in downtown, and then all of them transported to Theresienstadt. If anybody told me that this is somebody didn't know it, it's a lie. And it is important that we remember that, because what happened in 1938 that we're commemorating today can happen any time again, anywhere, and it happened. Cambodia, the killing fields of the Khmer Rouge in 1972, filled with the bodies of 1.2 million Cambodian Then the horrible massacre in Rwanda, 800,000 murdered and slaughtered with machetes, one tribe against the other tribe. The murder in Serbia of Muslims in front of mass graves shot that they need to dig out. And we can continue Syria and other places. It continues to happen because what we didn't learn, to have the guts to speak out. And the question is, what happens if we don't? That's what I learned. We will go back to that situation where certain minorities will be persecuted. Now we choose, once they choose the Jews, okay, but now it's the Muslim. Who else? Who else? And this is something that we need to learn. And we can only prevent it to happen again when we have the guts to say, we as Jews at least, or we as human beings in general, will not allow that to happen. And unfortunately, and with that I want to end, in this beautiful country of ours, which I'm deeply proud of to be a citizen of, I'm not only proud to be a citizen, I always, when I meet a World War II a soldier, an officer, I tell them, I want to thank you for the service and your sacrifice, because without you, I wouldn't be a free man. Now, what can we do today to be aware that it is happening today in our country, that Nazis, identified as Nazis, walk around with torches and exclaim, Jews will not replace us. That certain politicians will claim that we have a fake media, Lügenpresse, lying media. That was the textbook of Nazism. I can show you. One of the tactics is you extinguish the media. Lügenpresse, lying media. I don't care if there's a Democrat, a Republican, independent. I'm caring about as Americans. Or that Nazis walk around with not only with armbands, but with military assault rifles. We're living in a very dangerous time, in a watershed moment where we need to decide what we want to do. If we stay silent, we are accomplices of what will happen. I'm not staying silent. I never stay silent. That's what my wife said. You really should taper down a little bit the rhetoric. I said, I can't. I can't, because I know what happens when you stay silent. So against all odds, in my opinion, change is possible, and we should honor the victims not only with tears, but as a resolve, with a determination that we will make everything happen, that this will never happen again, ever. And we can do that. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
It is unusual that they applaud somebody while they are remaining silent. So
They don't do that with you?
no, I'm fine with that. But I think that you clearly have inspired all of us with your story and with your courage. We will, if you agree, open the room for
Questions and answers.
how many you want?
I don't know.
תגיד לי, 3, 4, 5.
תלוי.
So,
Okay.
about 5 questions, and
Sure.
you will handle them without me.
I will go for my right
I
to my...
like to take a couple of pictures with you, but
We do it. I go from my right to my left. There's nothing political, but I give everybody the chance. So I start with the center. Yes, ma'am. And then I come to... Not that one. Oh, I love her. I met, actually, she went to the army. I went back to Germany, and that the rest is history. She heard me talking to Israeli radio on the Yom HaShoah 5 years ago, and she said, she told me, I knew that it's you, but I never heard you speaking Hebrew. So she called the army radio. They called me if it's okay to give my contact information. I did, and a month later I visited her and her family, beautiful family. And we're in touch, but I didn't marry her. I know her. There's a question here, and then I go to the other side. Yes, ma'am?
Original
Well, I spent several months in Palestinian villages trying to learn the language, understanding their culture, because they are part and parcel of Israel. Israel is not only Jewish, Israel is a multicultural society. Jews, Arabs, Sunni, mostly Sunni Arabs, Christian Arabs, Cherkessim, Druze, Baha'i. It's a society where many different cultures come together, and it's the only country in the world where the attempt is being made that Jews and Arabs can live together for the last 70 years. And they do live together, regardless what happens. We are the only country that we have tried, and in my opinion, successfully tried, to live together. And nobody should divide us. So I try to understand their background, and just to give you one feedback from one of my friends, he said, look, isn't it ironic? You're coming here, convert to Judaism, become a Jew, become automatically an Israeli citizen, where I personally feel like a second-class citizen. These are conflicts that need to be addressed. That doesn't mean that Israel is a bad society. It just means that Israel faces challenges that other countries don't even want to touch with a 6-foot pole. We try very hard. There was a question on this side. Okay, then I go to you.
Did you have any siblings or extended family that questioned what you were doing?
Well, it's a good question. I had 2 sisters. When I left Germany, of course, the physical connection broke off. I didn't keep in touch with them. When I came back to Germany with my son, I visited my older sister in Düsseldorf, who was 10 years older than I am. And we at least could reconcile for the following 2 years. And I visited her several times. Unfortunately, she died in 2006. And then I have another sister. She lives in Bamberg. And we developed slowly a normal relationship. And hopefully that will continue. Did they question that? Well, they thought I went too far. Yes, I went to the extreme. But that is my way. Others didn't take it to the extreme. Yes, sir. Yes, sir? Absolutely. The last time I was in Germany was last year in Leipzig, to the Leipziger Buchmesse, the Leipziger Book Fair, where the German translation of my book came out. And Germans have nowadays a little bit more ambivalent attitude. We have to understand that. When they say, look, don't bring us all the time Auschwitz, Birkenau, and just throw it in our face. I know that happened, but we want to we improved our society, make a society better for many cultures to live in. And this is what our parents did with Auschwitz. I cannot undo it. We didn't do it. So they probably didn't like to be asked. They know. Yeah, there's a very intense class schooling and programs about. It's called now genocide prevention education. I'll give you one response from a young woman that I met. That was 2 years ago in Bamberg. We were sitting in a school, middle school, and a 15, 16-year-old girl asked me, and when I asked anybody a question, said, I have a question. I don't understand what you said. I said, oh boy, that's not good. And I said, I don't mean that I don't understand what you told us, but I don't understand why Jews are so separate from us, because we are one. We are not different than they are. We went to the synagogue in Bamberg. We are the same. Now, this is not happy kumbaya, but in understanding that Jews are not different to Germans. Give you an example. The mayor of Frankfurt is Jewish. When he was asked, the largest financial capital in Europe, when he was asked about his identity, he said, look, I was elected not because I'm Jewish or despite I'm Jewish. I was elected because I'm a German and a Jew. So these are the new normalcy. 50,000 Israelis live in Berlin. Because they run away from Israel? No, because it's a great place to live and relatively cheap, and has a lot of technology that allows them to work in. So these are the new realities in Germany. There was a question over there. Yes, sir?
When did you get married?
Okay, you mean my first, second, or third? I'm just kidding. Careful. I remarried in 2000 and, oh boy, 2000, yeah. Oh boy, that's doghouse now. I have one son, he's 29. I have a daughter, she's 25, and another daughter, she's 18.
Assume 25, 30 years ago.
I have 2 children from my first marriage, 1 child from my second, and I don't intend to enter into a third because it gets a little bit expensive. Miami, Florida. Yes, sir.
I've heard some Jewish scholars say that anti-Semitism is inherent in German culture going all the way back to the Middle Ages, and that it's unrealistic to think that it can change, and that frankly, no Jew who knows Jewish history should sensibly live in Germany.
Well, that's a very complex question. Let me attempt to give you the answer. Germany is the cradle of Judaism. One cradle of Judaism. If I may remind you, Jews live in Germany since 370 or 380 AD. They came with the Romans. When the Romans pushed through the river Rhine to Cologne, Colonia, it's a Roman city. And they came with the Romans because the Romans needed to have the infrastructure, not the academic infrastructure, but the economic infrastructure. Banks couldn't carry, so they carried Jews. Jews were only allowed to work in financial sector. So that was for them, the software in order to make the hardware run. So since then, Jews live in Germany. The Rashi in Worms, hopefully that means something for us. The Rashi in Worms practiced and studied and preached in Germany. The Orthodox Jewish Orthodox movement was coined by Samuel Raphael Hirsch. I have some books from in original German, and then moved to the United States. The Reform movement came from Germany. So anti-Semitism is not something that Germany is ingrained in their genes. Anti-Semitism happened in Germany too. If somebody asks me who has more or worse anti-Semitism, I clearly say the worst anti-Semitism I saw in the world is here, in the United States. This is the United States provides the most sophisticated neo-Nazi propaganda. Alt-right and Hitler propaganda is very active, has very good media, good in quotation mark. So the hardcore neo-Nazism is here and in Russia, not in Germany. In Germany, actually, if you attempt to make a joke, a joke, quotation mark, about Jews, you go into jail. You raise your hand in Hitler salute, you go to jail. You are selling and promoting Mein Kampf, except for academic reasons, you go to jail. You display the swastika, you go to jail. So it's very hard to believe that, and it's in Germany also not cool to make jokes about Jews, because this is a multicultural society nowadays. Germany is not the white nationalistic society anymore. It is a multicultural society with different colors in the sense of skin color, and that's okay. That's okay. Germany has dramatically changed. The safest place to live nowadays is Germany as a Jew. Not France, outside of Israel. Not France, not Switzerland, it's Germany. And the last what I can tell you is Germany has committed itself to Israel's security. It provides Israel with more sophisticated hardware, paid partially by Germany, or to a third, than the United States does. The entire Israel Navy submarine fleet is paid to a third by Germany. We have now 5 submarines, and according to foreign news sources, they report that these submarines are capable to launch a weapon which Israel allegedly doesn't have. And that is provided by Germany. The Germans know very well why the Israelis tinkering around with the submarines. They know exactly what's happening. So Germany, anti-Semitism in Germany is so separated from the current German culture that if you bring it in, people say, are you serious? I mean, that's over. Not in the United States. The hardcore neo-Nazi and alt-right Nazi movement is here in the United States. In 2 sentences, the migration of millions of people from the Middle East is the consequence of disastrous wars triggered by the United States. creating a vacuum in Iraq that is filled by these Iranians. The people in Syria specifically flee out of their country because they fear for their life, and they fear for their life from the crazies, the Shia. It's a difficult topic in Germany, but I agree with Chancellor Merkel the following. This will be the future German tax base. She's very utilitarian. She's a physician. She's a physicist. These 1.2 million that we accepted are the top of the line of Syria. Academician, engineers, hardcore, well-educated, committed to the country, will be committed to the country of Germany because they received them. And they will pay the taxes that Germany cannot pay anymore because it's an aging society. It was a very smart move. And of course, it caused a lot of friction, but it's in the context of everything else that's happening in the world, a brave move of a country which committed itself that it never happens again and make every effort to make good in the world as much as they can. That's the Germans. I'm not a German anymore. I have no ball in the game. But I always tell people, if you want to see a country that has tried and successfully tried to be responsible for what happened in the past, that's Germany.
I want to thank you again.